Thank you for this your participation to this H2O Lyon event. So we have a cross perspective on the value of water. There will be Philippe Polomé, who is economist, Emeline Comby, who is a geographer, and Gaetan, who is a legal expert. Value of water is the motto given to by the United Nations in order to better understand the complexity and the multi-dimensional aspect of this value, and should make it possible for us to better save water by understanding the complexity and therefore the value. And this could lead us to change our practices and usages. So I invite you to introduce yourself in a couple of words. Let's start with Philippe. Thank you. Good afternoon. So, I'm a teacher of environmental economy in Lyon, Université Lyon 2, mainly in the and I work mainly with on environmental risks, forestry policies, of social behaviors, and thermal assessment, which could be I do work a lot within a multidisciplinary framework, and therefore I'm in H2O. Became a member of H2O with great pleasure. I'm also coordinator of a master called Risk and Environment, and we'll say a couple of words at the end of the presentation. Good morning, Emeline Comby. I'm a teacher, geography teacher at the University of Lyon, and I'm a researcher in the EVS UR. I'm co-manager of the Observation Central of Lyon Rivers territory in the Bassin du Rhône in the Sabre, and I work mainly on an urban environment, public policies, environmental risk and communication. Concerning questions, I work on the our materialism, transform the environment, and also the intangible aspect and the representation. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the possibility to talk about water in this World Water Day. My name is Gaetan. I have a PhD in public law. I'm a post-PhD in the UMR EVS and in the Lyon 3 Environment Unit. I'm also a law teacher and co-manager of the Master Environmental Risk, and I teach the environmental law and urban planning law and urban development law. I work on my research work on the right of water, and the governance of this resource. And I work more specifically on the way standard or normative system emerge in order to manage a natural resource, and also work on urban planning law and environmental law as a general topic. First question I would like to discuss: what is the role and the importance of water in our society? Because to understand its value, we have to understand the importance of this resource. And so we wanted to, we'd like to have your vision as economist, legal expert, and geographer. We may start with Gaetan. So what is your vision as a legal expert? It is a tricky question because we may think that the law applying to water, well, we talk about water that change the composition. Well, it's not the case actually. As a function of its condition, water may have a different legal status. Water is present everywhere. It is necessary. It is everybody's common good, but it is nevertheless, law is somewhat disconcerting when it comes to water. Water is used in many, many different ways, and we see that the lack of harmonization of law in that respect makes water the topic of different legal or system that may be contradictory because of its status or situation of who owns it and the usage thereof. water could be submitted to several legal aspects or systems because law may consider water as a private property, a common good, an element of common good of the nation, natural environment to be preserved, as well as a commodity. And this heterogeneousness of understanding leads to the notion that water is not a general commodity, and it has to, and according to the European law, water management must be sustainable and balanced, and therefore we have a general framework which is rather broad, and water can be integrated in different scales of value, which correspond to just as many different legal systems or legislations. We may identify different values of water, an economic value in as much as it is sold. So it could be drinking water, public services in that respect. It can be also, it could, where we have to see the economic value of water through its various usages in the industry or farming, agricultural, for example, irrigation. So all those economic aspects will be discussed by Philippe later on. But law gives kind of a corpus to the values. The economic value will be included in law. It will be taken into consideration. Law will also recognize a heritage value to water as it is a resource and a natural environment to be preserved. So environmental law will govern this water protection of the water resource. Whereas when we talk about economic value, as early on, we're dealing with public law, public services law that will govern this economic value. Environmental law and its heritage aspect, its heritage value, will give an ecosystemic value to the resource. And this is quite interesting, actually, to see how it translates into law. And there will also be a cultural value when if we consider that some societies are framed around water. We're referring here to the observation of some local rights, some customs, local customs, which correspond to some usage, very specific usages in some specified communities, in which cases the cultural value of water, which is at the core of society, will be then at the origin of the creation of the advent of a law system, of a legal system, and the usage of water based on the value assigned to it that will lead to some standards or norms. And then we'll see that water is at the center of a specific legal or governance system. Then we may also see in a law, in the environmental law, there'll be a social recreational value for what assigned to water, and therefore there will be fishery, nautical or water sports. So law frames the various usages of water, the different usages of water, and therefore recognizes all the various values that can be assigned to this natural resource. Therefore, the legal life of a drop of water is quite strange. It is naturally emitted when it drops from the sky, or while it is in an underground table or in the ice of a glacier. It becomes private property when it can be captured, or it could be public property when it is in a river in public domain. Can be a private, collective. Basically, the ecological cycle, or through the ecological cycle of the law, of the water, there will be also a legal cycle. Yes, indeed, this idea of legal cycle and ecological cycle echoes to reflection from geographers. Geographers consider that we've gone from hydrological cycle, the drop of water from the cloud to the sea, basically, this is what we've all learned at school. We've gone from this hydrological cycle to hydrosocial cycle, which comprise three elements, according to Jeremy Milton and Jessica Buds. First component will be natural aspect, that is the H2O molecule, which gives the name to this UR. And the quality, but also the quantity of water will play key roles in the value. The two quality and quantity elements are essential. And to illustrate my work, we could rely on the notion of the flow rates of river. If you take a river like the Rhone, the increase of the quantity of water, reserve quantity to ensure the life of ecological systems. Well, the increase of flow rates for ecological restoration plan will lead to less water to be used in power plants. So there could be two different usages which are competing. Hydraulic electricity production, each water drop is to be valorized, whereas a more ecological or ecosystemic system where water becomes a living environment for the fauna and flora. And in order to compensate for the deficiency in the case of the Rhone National Company has small hydropower plants on the shunted arms to compensate for the loss of power. Behind the power, the flow rate, there could be a molecule that is natural. We realize more and more that the flow rate is a balance between different usages in an entropic flow rate, because there are variations due to dams or other infrastructures or such as channels. Well, so many x n cubic meters will need to arbitration between different usages. And the second component is based on infrastructure networks and technological networks. The idea is what we learn from hydrological cycle is that water is in a catchment basin. And when we look at societies, water is outside of its catchment basin due to the fact that water can be pumped. So Erin Swingodo said, for example, a geographer said that water does not run off based on the slope, but as a function of the money. That is, it runs where there will be resources to be valorized, irrigation, urban plant development, and so on and so forth. A good example is what is taking place in California, where water from the north of California, from the Sacramento catchment basin, is sent to the south via, high-powered pumps. There is a canal system, to develop irrigation and urban planning. So the first component is H2O. Second component are the infrastructures and techniques. And the third one that we see subjacent when we talk about irrigation and urban development are the socio-economic organizations, and of course, the political relationships, which are reflected or reproduced. And this is a key element, because today the water landscapes are the result of the social, economic, and historic relations. If you look at the landscape of the Rhone River, I keep the Rhone because we are in the H2O Lyon. Well, this landscape is the result of choices, arbitration within a context where France, because of the war destruction that in 1945, tried to restore its political prestige and tried to reconstruct itself economically and socially. What should be noted that the first development of the Rhone River in 45-60, in terms of development, National Company of the Rhone, the developments there after the war were there to reconstruct France, to have energy resources, while putting to the fore the function of the President of the Republic, a function which had been somewhat damaged by the recent events. While fitting with it an ideal of modernization, we built the Rhone based on the model of Tennessee Valley in the US. We took our inspiration from dams with several usages to reconstruct the Rhone. Moreover, in addition to the US inspiration, the Marshall Plan, which made it possible to finance some of those developments. What's interesting there is that 5 dams were built between 1945 and 1960 on the Rhone by the National Compagnie Nationale du Rhône. There was an ex nihilo landscape, the Rhone shunted with islands and then a dam, a reservoir, a channel, and this new landscape, landscaping can be explained by economic and political factors. So I think the 3 components are essential, because we can see how the natural element, the development aspect, and the political aspect and social and economic aspect make it possible to place water within its global context. value of water is based on its context, it is also a mirror as well as the metrics thereof. And this double couple mirror metrics is essential to understand the value of water today. Well, I can hear, yeah, you talk about economic value. I don't know if we all have the same ideas of what is the economic value for economists, but let me start. Well, we'll talk about value later on, but I'd like to talk about the importance, because the about the importance of well, the importance of water is total. Water is at the basis of all economic processes, directly or indirectly, because it is indispensable to life. If I talk about the importance of water at the economic level, well, I will assign it everything from the whole economic production, but it's not the only one. Air or work or labor or force. So it's not a very operational notion for economists, importance, because rapidly we run into some sort of dead ends. Well, we get to notions of importance which include the entire economic activity. We could talk about the value of one additional liter of water, one drinking water for a liter of drinking water for a household, or not necessarily drinking water for a farm or for a river. We're in a context where there is the issue of development, the question of, so this is notion of, rather than looking at the global importance, to look at the small changes, what we call the marginal in the sense of not secondary, but associated with a small volume. And this, it would make more sense. It would make more sense to talk value in that sense. And therefore, it is very much like a price, because if I say the importance of 1 liter of water, what can it be? Well, anyway, in economy, on a market, it is the relative abundance of goods or a commodity of a service. Diamonds are expensive because they're rare, but virtually they have absolutely no significance as to the economy as such. If we don't have any more diamonds, the economy would not be damaged. Global economy would not be damaged. So, whereas without water, the price is not the economic importance. The economic importance does not come from the price per se. The fact that there is a market or there are private operators does not reflect the importance, the economic importance. It's paradoxically, air is not in the market, but it is essential to have, a law system is indispensable for the economic system, and yet we cannot assign a market price to it. So the notions of economic values lead us to this, will shift to consideration which are not commercial. Now, but often, I see that in the press or in the media or in more political consideration, there is something to be a confusion between price and value, which may lead to difficulties in the management of the resource. The absence of price, often when we manage a resource such as water at a given time, there could be, for legal issues, for legal reasons, and for other, there will be the notion of economic calculation. So, which leads to the next point. But how do we decide when there is an action? And if I don't have a price, well, then we saw in the past that no price would be like a zero price. So in certain circumstances, then I fully agree that there are systems in which it developed differently. But there are many cases where the absence of price led to a zero price implicitly, and therefore things which were not commercial, which are not commodity, which has a zero price, well, were outside of the economic political poli- economic political decisions and led to abuse of usage. So what are we going to do to try to pull out of that? So to summarize on the importance, to close this point, well, water is an importance equal to the and all economic systems. And there was a system on the what is the cost of ecosystems. Well, the entire economic production. So what we call the total value, but it's not very operational. So we'll talk more about marginal values. I mentioned several usages, and so there will be different marginal values, but they are not the prices per se. We move on to the second question. So we're now in the core of the topic. How can we define the value of water? Because it is complex. And as you said, it's not limited to a price. And then the idea is to have different viewpoints on this value of water. Could we possibly, Philippe, could you link on and what is the value what is the value of water? Well, there could be also the notion of cost, that we could add or consider. But anyway, uh, so would not be quite useful because, well, what is taking place is that we have notions of water which could have a value. We could do the tap water, for example. Okay, fine, we can calculate the cost of bringing drinking water to a tap, to the household, but also bottled water. But there is water in the river as well, and water in the underground tables and wastewater. So all those aspects have cost, different cost. So how can we work with that? What concerned the economists was to have a notion of value in a context of public policy, in a broad meaning of the word, in a broad situation where we want to decide collectively on what we wish to do, but we don't have all the means to do it. So that's the decision of assignment of means when we have limited means. So this is the problem of economists. This is so those are issues. Do I have to build a road? Do I have to build a hospital? Do I have to protect natural zones? It is an economic problem. Well, not only economic, but it is economic to protect a natural area in as much as, well, in order to protect a natural zone, we will assign public resources. And the question then becomes, why would I put money there or resources, whatever, rather than elsewhere? So that could ask that question about, standard on distribution of water distributions, so. And in many cases, not always in all cases, but one question which may be asked is that public resources are assigned where they provide the best resources. And then we're talking about the economic efficiency of economic decision. It is quite reasonable to say, okay, I have a certain package that I can use. How will I distribute it or break it down so that it will be best used? Economists see the idea of doing the best, to have the best goods as to to work for the best of each individual. So in a context of public resource allocation, we'd like to compare costs, the cost of building a dam or building a wastewater treatment plant, with the benefits. And the benefits would be all sorts of things. It could be, commercial in cash, in monetary values. We could also benefits if I build a wastewater water plant, well, the water coming into the underground water table, well, will need less work to be potable, to be drinking. So to be fresh drinking water. So it will be, but I can come to benefits which are completely non-commercial. For example, to build a wastewater treatment plant will improve the biodiversity of the river next, and I don't have a market for that, but it is a point within that precise context that there are notions of uh, predisposition to pay have been developed. The first to develop that, what they call the people who are in charge of building dams, and I think as of the 1920s, they had to justify the social benefits of the building of dams, including the benefits which did not impact the economic sphere. And they were asked to fundamentally convert non-commercial benefits into something that could be compared to the construction cost of the dam. So central idea is to always bring to a one unit of account and to have an economic analysis to see if benefits are higher than cost. Well, I have to do the project. So this notion of value in economy, which is the position adopted, is not a price, it's not a cost, but it is something which is individual, what each individual would be ready to pay to obtain a certain commodity or service, commercial or not. It could be like 1 liter of tap water, or to have more fish in the Rhone River. Everything is possible, because at the end, we want to compare with the cost of the impact of policies. So, of course, the availability to pay is different from one individual to another, and there is an individualistic dimension there in this economic approach. And the idea is to be able to assess these positions. There are different. Those are quite difficult calculation to be made. But when we do assessment or estimation to price to be paid, and we do a summation and we compare them to the cost, and against the cost, and also the disposition to pay are not easy with individuals. Well, techniques are not necessarily reliable. They've been exploited for tens of years, but their reliability is always open to caution, and it's far from a market. And values or dispositions positions are sometimes difficult to assess because people are not used to it. Sometimes those are figures which have no meaning. So the ethical dimension of the approach is sometimes challenged. Those are policies which have an impact on human health. So we talk about marginalization of human health, and I think it's not the fact that we associate cost with impacts on things that impact us, and benefits of some costs can only appear far in the future. For example, we talk about climate change right now. I mean, if we want to fight against climate change, it is now with effects in several tens of years or decades. How do you account for that? And sometimes it could be benefits which occur only if some conditions are present. There is a notion of risk that when we establish certain policy, a certain attention, it doesn't always work. And then eventually, there is the issue of relevant population. When we impact the non-commercial benefits, the quality of water, for example, in the Rhone, who will benefit from that? People who live next to the Rhone, or the entire population, or the French population, or where do we stop? So it's not easy. So all those are criticism, even though results when we apply the, results sometimes are variable, but fundamentally, it is the critics about the very reason of the approach to this position, which is to bring everything to only one unit with an intention which is that of the collective benefits. That's it. So notion of value in economy is the disposition to pay. There is no one value of water. There is an infinity of values depending on the context and the policies which are assessed. And value depends on the context. Thank you. I'll stop now for this part. Thank you, Philippe, for this economic explanation on the value of water. So, Emeline, Gaetan, your viewpoints in your disciplines on how to define the value of water. Gaetan. It's interesting because Philippe's presentation fuels a lot of reflections about the link between the merchandisation or the fact that you apply a cost to identify the value of water, and this is found as well in law in different aspects, and then we'll come back to it. From the law viewpoint, the value of water is defined either by the regulation in force or by the contracts governing this. Water is integrated into a commercial principle. That is, it would be when it is considered the element is a commodity that is being traded between people or institutions. So regulation will assign a value, social value to water, and the contractualization will lead to this economic value or this commercial value to water, what will define the value of water is the usage and its availability as well as its quality, of course, because we want to identify the intrinsic value of water regardless of the exchanges. First, we'll look at this from three examples. First, the usage of water is normalized. There are legal standards. Law applies to water, to the usages of water, and to the management of water, and translate the interest of society for the resource and therefore its value. Whenever there is a law, there are societal interests. Society will create law and which will organize the relations within the society. If we consider an element as sufficiently important to be legally governed, well, it means that we are giving water a given value. And in fact, usages intended for water are always framed, often restrictive. For example, in French law, most water usages are controlled by an authorization system, the administrative authorization system. Before using water, before using it for irrigation or to drill in a groundwater table to pump water, you have to ask the administration. You have to obtain an authorization for the administration, or you will do a declaration. I'll spare you the details. But anyway, there is always sort of the administration will always give its agreement or not to the usage of water in most cases. Now, the fact that there is this public dimension through the public authority, which will regulate all this, well, shows the value given to water, to its usage, and the preservation of its quality as well. Now, before being commercially exploited, any collection of that resource is framed, and these obligations result from the status given to water, which is a common heritage, a common good. A law will set water resource within this common heritage. And therefore, we will patrimonialize this resource. And this will have several consequences, including the fact that the law says that the preservation of the water resource and its balanced and sustainable management serves the general interest. That is, we will make legitimate the intervention of the administration of the state, of course, in most cases, to regulate water usages or to install public services which will be focused on management and sharing of water. Yet, those standards or norms applied to the management, sharing, and governance of water as such, they're not only state norms or rules. We are not dealing with the law or the regulation, but sometimes such norms may take the form of contractual rules in a contract. For example, be they public contracts, be domain concessions, which are granted by a public owner to an operator, usually a private operator, um, to use the river, for instance, to use a river to be clearer. Let's put it this way: the the exploitation of the Rhone, which belongs to the public domain, and there could be a concession, a contract, when if a dam is built or power production unit plant, or they said, well, Emeline said, well, these installations will be granted a contract, which will, and therefore they will be authorized. And the public authority will deliver the concession contract. And it is not, therefore, a public contract. Water can also be traded, and therefore there will be contracts, private contracts. We talk about selling water or service, service provision, and therefore it is water usage provided by the contract, but also on the market itself, which will lead the parties to the contract to set a price and therefore a value. And the context within which the contract will be signed, which is and this will determine the price and therefore the value of water. Then availability of water itself will define its value. The easier the access, the lesser the value, or at least in theory, that is. So when we talk about accessibility, well, it's not necessarily the abundance of water, because sometimes water may be abundant. We can see on the news right now that the fact that there are major floods in Australia. Water is abundant, let's face it, but at the same time, you don't quite need it right now. But maybe in 6 months, when they will have their droughts, in the same areas, well, they'll say that water will be less present and water will be less accessible. So there is a difference between accessibility, availability of water, and its abundance and its presence in the environment. And therefore, all this will be integrated by law, in as much as law will attempt to take into consideration the availability, which is directly linked to the quality of water. And therefore, legislation will set objectives in terms of quality and quantity in order to always have this objective of balanced, sustainable management of water, surface water or underground water table. And therefore, if one affects the quality of water or damage quality of water, let's say accidental pollution, industrial accident, for example, this will have an impact on availability and the possible usage by another party. And there could also be a problem with pollution, accidental or not accidental, it will damage it will have an impact, negative impact on the ecosystemic, on the ecosystems, and therefore any degradation of water or the water resource on the aquatic environment may be sanctioned, punished. In law, there are a certain number of infractions which may be will be taken to lead to a court case. For example, the blockage of water course, for example, water flow rate. Another means to preserve quality of water and its intrinsic value is once again to go through fact that there will be an economic cost to water, to its usage, or to the lack thereof. And this is what is found in the permit for environmental services. We will try to give a value, economic value or financial value, monetary value to natural element, water and the aquatic environments in order to pay the actions for the preservations. Likewise, we try to give a price to some natural elements or when we want to repair damages. Earlier on, I talked about pollution, for example, but how can we repair when a natural environment that has been destroyed? Well, sometimes to repair this, today we talk about ecological prejudice. In order to repair the prejudice, of course, there will be repair mechanisms. So we will restore the environment, but we'll also be able to, gives a compensation to the person. Often there are, natural protection environment, and for this, again, we'll have to set a price and a cost for this damage to the environment, give a cost to pollution. And this is where it will be the interaction between law and economic science will be interesting. Finally, and to conclude on this, we could ask ourselves as well, who before the law will guarantee the assessment or the estimation of the value? Well, sometimes we may say, in some cases, that it is the judge. The judge will guarantee the value or will guarantee the balance. Early on, Philippe talked about the cost and benefits, the cost-benefit balance between the cost, which is environmental cost induced by the development project, which will impact water and the aquatic environment, and the benefit of the same project. For example, the judge, especially the administrative judge, will try to identify the general interest, public utility, major public interest of such a project. And all the positive and negative elements will be integrated in the balance, and therefore project owners will need to repair, to pay compensations for the damages they've caused, and there will be an estimation of the cost and therefore a value. Thank you. Thank you, Gaetan. Emeline, would you like to add to this? Rapidly, well, my colleagues, Philippe and Gaetan, are both very competent in geography, in the geography practice. Well, we're quite reluctant to give a value to water because we associate value, commercialization, and of course the interference of the economic prism. So we find that in other thinker in human and social science, in philosophy and others. In addition to the reluctance, there is a problem in the sense that how can we give a real value? For example, as a geographer working on urban environment, it's very difficult to know, to have a view on the Rhone River, for example. Of course, there are districts, at confluence, for example, as it was ex nihilo built at the same period. to compare the purchasing prices. The architect different, the definitions are different, but there are many elements. It's difficult to give a real value, but we could say that even though you have to go to a real estate, if you sue the question of confluence one, it used to be 6,000 6,000 euro for square meter. Now it's 4,000 square meters. So different goods. Well, there were different types of flats. Depends again on the quality of the urban development, and it's difficult to identify what is really the role of water when compared to other criteria. So the choice I've made is to look at the capital circuits and develop the secure capitals and the work on the. So we're not the first to do, the other works have been done, on this, to say basically we will study how capital circulate, to see how globally what are the money flow, the capital flow. Well, to say basically capitalism functions on the principle of accumulation, added value, accumulation of the added value. And there are times when there is not enough added value, and therefore in this case, what do we know? Capitalism will be deployed elsewhere or differently. And these times of change of capitalistic system towards other spaces to avoid the economic crisis, makes it possible to understand the circuits. And this is geohistorical approach is interesting. If we look at the urban waterfront, the first circuit of capital would be at a time, industrial districts were created with consumption water. The water would be the Mouche district in Lyon, for example, which has the railway and the industry. Then there was a second circuit, end of 19th century, where capitals went to infrastructures, production infrastructures and consumption infrastructures. And this is where they built the port district in Lyon, the Port Rambaud, which is now in Confluence, and of course the Port Édouard Herriot. Then there is a third stage. Third circuit, of course, they could be concomitant. The second doesn't replace the first. The third circuit will rest on long-term investment, especially in education, but in health. In Lyon, there is a very emblematic district, Berge-du-Rhône, with Université Lyon 2, 3, and Saint-Joseph Saint-Luc Hospital. We are in a redeployment of capitals around water. And finally, the fourth circuit, which is more like a circuit that is the quest for a symbolic capital, recreation, staging, with strong accent put on virtual, the future. We see it in the 60s, 70s, 80s, which is still growing. And the Confluence district fits within this fourth capitalistic circuit, insisting on everything that is added value, the recreational, leisure, culture, with media, and the innovation, the staging of innovation through innovative transportation modes. All this to say that geographer will change things, his vision to see how material forms of capitalism make it possible to think the various values given to water, which are successive but also in superimposition. They're overlapping, with because the city builds itself over itself. So this value given to water is complex for geographers to address, because we don't have the same methodological tools, but because we don't ask the same questions. Because one of the main questions of the geographer is to give to give the specialized, the space dimension of value. And this is when we work on individuals or when we work on districts, we don't work on the same scales. We don't have the same methodology in terms of value given to water. The third question we want to discuss, which is in line with the topic, in your opinion, based on your discipline and on your experience and possibly your analysis, to better understand the value of water makes it possible to save it, preserve it, and the aspect of commercialization or merchandisation of water. So what is your opinion on this? The question is better. I understand that there are many notions of values that, as Emeline has just mentioned, that they're not the ones that I've put forward. So I might come back to my own values, the way I see this question of the availability or disposition to pay around water. I don't know if it will make it possible to preserve it, to save it. To answer this, I would need some kind of a scientific test. On the one hand, there would be control group, would be another test group, and where we would decide to use the value of water and the first one not, and then a kind of an indicator, common indicator of all those policies and their successes of a certain number of points. Well, I don't have this scientific answer in general. It's a good question, though. Yeah, quite difficult to find an answer. But anyway, I will. I won't give you a scientific answer, but I think the popularity of economic analysis in the political decision making increases, and we could say that it is because there is an improvement of decision. But we could also say that it is probably easier to do calculation of value now as it than in the past because of the improvement of the information system and the facility with which we could get ideas on the value of the price of housing, for example, as Emeline said, but also to do when we do surveys, this is certainly increasingly improving. So figures are more easily available. We could maybe see a sort of political, once you got a quantitative criterion, uh, you see what it goes. Well, there are less political decisions to be made, and maybe some decision makers love this. They, this could explain the popularity of the economic control in the political decisions. I don't know. I would say that globally there is an improvement, and the procedures are revised on a regular basis. And currently, again, for all major projects in France and in well, I don't know the legislation of all countries, but I think it's roughly the same in all countries, Western countries. In all major public projects, now there must be economic analysis with the commercial benefits or which is followed with by counter expertise, counter evaluation. There are people whose job it is to try to see if all the costs and benefits, commercial and non-commercial, have been taken into account. But for as far as I can see, in France, we are not quite pioneers when it comes to the factoring of the factoring in of all the non-commercial benefits, which are not always taken into account. So therefore, the counter expertise I was talking about often is very critical of the economic analysis on public project by pinpointing gaps, but does not stop the project. We're improving things, but we're not there yet. I think you put in your slides, you had a table, yeah, table with this one. Well, it does nothing to, well, don't dwell on the on the figures which are in the it's just an illustration. It is a source of information provided by the General Commissariat to Sustainable Development a few years ago on the economic evaluation of services provided by water. This is a table we put in the slides just to show. So those figures would help build the economic analysis to, well, figures were derived, within a scientific context, but They're taken here by the Commissariat to Sustainable Development within a context of support to economic analysis for public projects. So you can see that things are given on some site and then in some characteristics of what should be taken into account, improvement of the ecological heritage in the framework of DCA. From this table, you have to go and see the publications and you can see that there are figures in Europe per household and per year, and those figures should be reused in other close contexts, such as benefit transfers. The original studies, which are intended to define values in giving context, and these studies, there are a lot of tables like that with value, and we can see that in the domain of water, we less advanced because than in other domains in France, in the domain of transport, for example, where mobility in France, well, you know, there are the tables. Well, we've been sensitized by commissions which worked for a long time to establish values which are consensual. And especially when we talk about transport, we talk about if we create a road, of course, it will generate traffic, it will save elsewhere. So there will be more or less accidents. You know, what is the cost of the accident vis-a-vis the construction cost of the road? So in the domain of transport for the ministry, well, this has been strongly structured. For water, well, clearly figures circulate. We could find others, but it is less. There's been less structuration. There is also a context which it brings us close to law, which is somewhat different, but we use the same notions, which is that of lawsuit for damages. Okay, Gaetan will probably blame me because I'm not using the proper vocabulary, says the speaker. You know, when there's a prejudice, you know, non-commercial or non-merchant prejudice, the US were pioneer in this domain, and I think I see that European legislation is evolving slowly on this notion of based on the US legislation. And there is the Exxon Valdez, you know, oil spill in the Alaska coastline had no economic damage per se, but it brought in economic recipes or revenues because people went to a zone where there is nobody. A lot of the touristic industry boomed, you know, because people went there to help clean up the oil spill. The main damage of the oil spill was non-commercial. That is, there were, you know, wild species, you know, birds, fish, you know, mammals which were impacted. So yeah, by the, you know, and therefore, so for me, it impacts the value, you know. So we talked about loss of 10 years of coastal biodiversity. You know, it was quite gigantic, you know, at the time. So, and value in 1989 was $3 billion US, and the judge had agreed, and clearly the acceptance of this value changed the legislation, which clearly gave incentives, stronger incentives to the oil companies to, well, basically to stop taking so much risk in the transport of oil. So this legislation was then copied nicely on the European level. So I would say that this is a case where we can say that indeed a better understanding of water value, the value of water made it possible to preserve it. Now, are there more or less oil spills after this? I think there is less, but it's only a feeling. That's it. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Merci Philippe, effectivement.
Thank you, Philippe. Gaetan, maybe could you add on this?
Préjudice à payer peut-être.
About the prejudices or damages? Well, thank you, Philippe, for having done a bit of a teasing on my contribution. Indeed, in law, there are several ways to identify the way a value to water is assigned. A value assigned to water makes it possible to preserve it. First, there is the issue of the repair of prejudice, the ecological prejudice or damages. And all this results from general principles. It should be reminded that in European law, under French law, European law, each individual, private or public, should contribute to the preservation of the environment and of the natural resources, and therefore is responsible from the repair of the damages to the resources, damages which may result from the behavior of these individuals or entities. So the preservation of the environment includes the preservation of water. The polluters pays, whoever pollutes pays. For example, this is based on the fees, on the water bill, on your invoice. There are mandatory fees, collected by the water agencies and which finance the public services as well as other actions carried out, including research actions done by water agencies. So all this is, in fact, the best example of the application of the polluters payers, who, in terms of water preservation, the purpose is to have to be an incentive. These are tax devices, and the incentive, because the higher the water consumption, the higher the fees, and therefore, this will be found in other domains such as in waste, for example, solid waste, and therefore, to change individual behavior, these mechanisms will contribute to evidence the value of the resource you will use, or the resource which we will damage. And early on, I was discussing that, but water damages. We characterize a misbehavior, a violation. There are other sanctions. So what's a crime? Basically, an ecological crime, but the penal response to these crimes, and especially cases of pollutions, well, they answer characterize the societal value given to the assigned to the object, because the penalty or the punishment is pronounced on behalf of the disorder or cause to the social order, or the impact on the social order. And this is where the difference between sanction and reparation. And so I will talk about the ecological prejudice, but also the penal sanction, because when you if you look at the law, society will claim the punishment to someone who would have damaged one of its values. Societal values identified by penal law are such that when they are damaged, we deserve a sanctions, punishment. So it's interesting to see that we see the multiplication of environmental crimes, and there are identifications, pollutions, for example. After identification, there will be a sanction that will correspond, and the sanction will be financial sanction, the payment of a penalty when it's not a sanction of or even prison. It could be a prison sentence. So there will be penalties today which are getting higher and higher. Again, this is one way to give a certain value to the damage, and therefore to the object of the damage. which has been damaged. And for example, we can see that penalties, especially for pollution, water pollution, are very, very high, getting higher. And it's interesting in terms of presidential water and its value, because they will be, it's like it's hundred thousands of euros. And what's interesting today, and especially when we identify or when we look at the current project of law on climate and resilience, well, it is the fact that we integrate a general crime of pollution, and that we give today, we assign a value, societal value, to the entire environment from the penal aspect, was beforehand we had the penalties which are very specific to water, for example. So now, once you impact the environment, especially the ground, soil pollution could be sanctioned, punished, if the law is adopted as such, passed as such. Now, beyond sanctions, there are repair mechanisms, and therefore the idea of ecological prejudice or damage, and based on water and based on the model mentioned by Philippe early on, um, following the Erika court case, the Court of Cassation integrated the idea of ecological damage. That is, there will be repair for environmental damage, and there it's not penal, but we are looking for repair, but then we need to identify or calculate, define the value of the object, well, the element that was damaged, and in this case, water and the coastline, which had been impacted by the oil spill. So this repair will be in first natural, but it could also be a financial uh, indemnity. So then we need to define the scope of the prejudice and the amount of the repair, and therefore you have to determine the financial value of water. Another way for law to identify and to protect water via the identification of its value is once more what we may call the merchandisation of environmental law, and especially through the notion of service, ecosystemic service, and payment for environmental services. You can identify service provided by environment to man and service provided by man to the environment, in order to integrate them in law, and we'll go through so-called economic mechanisms, and therefore we will go through the contractual pathway, and through the identification of a price. And some would advocate for the payment of any service paid by man to the, or provided by man to the environment. And this, anything done to help the environment should be paid. And again, the problem is to identify and to determine this this fee, the fee or the payment or remuneration. And there, the law right turns into private law, contractual law, whereas it was mainly police right, administrative police right, based on the regime of control extension. And with the mercialization of economicization, we go to a private and contractual law. And I'll conclude on the last note. There is not just the financial value or monetary value that makes it possible to be integrated in law and to protect water resources, but there are also the cultural value, which makes it possible to protect some aquatic elements. For example, we go to the notion of common or a common heritage, and this notion of patrimonialization or common heritage makes it possible to identify elements which are managed, which are governed commonly by, like the sharing of water resources. And sometimes we may identify common elements which are not shared, such as irrigation or drinking water supply, but simply they being used, sacred usage, for example, or holy usages. And by law, will through regulation legislation, we may protect lakes, for example, but not in Western law, but in Asia, for example, we will identify uh, uh, water mass where we see indigenous communities being constituted around the lake, the pond or whatever. And this protection through the patrimonialization, it comes because the pond or the lake has a cultural value, almost holy, and it will be protected, and we will prevent industrialists from taking water from it. And this was observed, consecrated by the Indian Supreme Court. And the idea of a common of heritage of or going through law and preservation of law of indigenous communities makes it possible to integrate within law the need, the necessity to protect and preserve water via its cultural value. Thank you, Gaetan, for this cultural dimension, which is, we not addressed that yet.
On a bien débordé sur le timing, donc je vais laisser quand même la
We are
parole
running out
aux
of time,
chercheurs.
so I'll let Emeline finish with this question on how to better understand the value of water to preserve it. So quickly, let me summarize my idea. Well, one of the choice of the public policy is that within the context of climate change, to reduce water consumption, they play on what they call the exchange value. Philippe said it that well, value is not just the price, but the exchange value, for the price of a water bill. So this question of concordance between coherence between what we pay and what we consume, the in the usage of water. And it's true that often the solution which is recommended is to play on this exchange value to reduce usages. Let me give you an example. In the city of Sacramento, well, the inhabitants of Sacramento overconsume water, which is twice as large as the city of San Francisco. Because of this observation, well, the two cities share the same climate in the same state. Well, it was decided to install water meters in the houses. That will be effective in 2025. Everybody will have a water meter. So how was the invoicing before? You paid according to the surface area of your house, the number of rooms. It was extrapolated. Now the idea now will be to measure at the scale of the house so that the invoice will correspond to the consumption, real consumption. So behind the idea is to that there could be an increase of the bill, an increase of the exchange value, which will better reflect consumptions and which will lead consumers to reduce their consumption. So vis-a-vis, well, in geography, we're very critical there because it's a model we know in many countries, and often what we realize that the rich ones continue consuming because they have loans to water and swimming pools, but the increase of the bill tends to penalize modest income household rather than rebalancing the consumption. Last element, which is in echo with what Gaetan said, we did insist on the exchange value. We talked about usage value. We talked about the non-usage value. Gaetan called the cultural values. Well, usually two types, values associated with the heritage and the transmission, and the value associated with the existing, independent from the utilization. I can talk about the non-usage type one, the heritage transmission, which are very present in protected areas. When you protect space, you want to be able to extract a threat, a risk to maintain or improve the condition of a system. So what do we see? That those protected spaces, which are more in the value of non-usage of heritage, well, there is an increasing exploitation through excursionist practices, leisure practice or recreational practices. And this patrimonialization means that there is an economic development and territorial marketing, place marketing, the potential, this protected space are like resort, alternative resources. Just to give you an example, in the Drôme Valley in the Rhône-Alpes region, well, there is a national natural reserve created following under the pressure of ecological association. Well, the emerge was created in 1987. They cited a bird very emblematic, of this zone, and when the development of the reserve was taken by a group of municipality facilities, they changed the logo, and we went from the bird, which is a very ecological, to a beaver, a smiling beaver, orange, very animal, it's got a great smile. And, we went from it's more like a publicity. And we can see, therefore, that to the two logo, the change of valorization of the river, from there is a change of regime, and we go from a value of non-usage and heritage transmission to something which turns into, well, the usage value, but value of exchange, because this change of logo means that there is a museographic dimension with a payment, so clearly there is a balance, which is always, well, it is really on the line between this value of non-usage and this recognition, which could rapidly shift to a usage value in a context where, especially public policies, elected people will promote the development of the territory and go into an exchange values. It's a difficult question, viability for the payment for ecosystemic services, so for PAS, well, can we generalize this? I don't know. I think indeed in agriculture, we've gone from a common agricultural policy that is subsidies for production after the war to now subsidies for ecosystemic services. It's not yet the largest volumes are not there, but with behind that the idea of by paying ecosystemic services, we make it possible for farmers to stay in the territory and and um, and to avoid the loss of rural exodus, for accidental, European.
Que c'est en place. Et je constate que non, tu ne trouves pas que ça fait longtemps que c'est en place, Gaëtan? Si, on le voit.
You don't think so? This is an idea which is very present, this is present for quite a while, which will, which is also in the US, where the idea of to buy back, to buy practices, to pay compensation for practices to obtain green corridors or blue corridors, or to private operators. So concerning the economic viability, well, basically, let's not lose track of the fact that those are services that are needed. This is my starting point. Without those services, the economy would not function. So I think there must be an acknowledgement, partial, biased, whatever, but there is a recognition, increasing recognition of contributions, but it's more in the agricultural or in forestry as well, domains, because So this is in terms of financing, it's more in the agricultural domain, which tends to, well, I would tend to say that the the resources used efficiently, they must be used efficiently if behind there is, assuming behind they correspond to specific needs, or, but in this case, it would be viable. Yes. Well, just to answer this question rapidly to the concerning the economic viability of the PES system, well, there is something that is quite striking. If you pay a farmer, if you leave aside the fact that his sustainable practice is, he respect the environmental resources, is integrated in his practices. So we'll pay him for something he already does. So he's already doing, but yeah, it's whereas, please no. So it's we have to look at the so the question I have beyond this, the question I have, what strikes me is the source of the fees. It's public money. So of the today, PES are integrated are integrated in the new common agricultural policy, which is so. What are we going to do once we will have passed the 5 years of the the few years of back? What are we going to do if we integrate that in subsidies, and it will be integrated in public policy cycles? And once this cycle will land, well, what about the funding? Today, those PES are financed only by the common agricultural policy. And will money be always oriented towards PES? I'm not sure. So what are we going to do? And this is the question of the economic viability I would talk about, is the durability of of this. I talked about economic viability in the sense of a fundamental sense, that is, does it contribute collectively to the common to all? But we cannot on how this will evolve. But for the common agricultural policy, and for regional funding, regional funding could be, it is a commitment that is increasing. It is something that is increasing. So even more so that, I mean, those are strategic considerations, but we cannot international plan. We cannot subsidize, agricultural production, because then it is dumping. It considers dumping, and then you end up in a difficult position in the at the international level, in the internal negotiation on. So those are considerations we should not be there. But in terms of viability for the operator, I think it is those considerations on the competition and dumping. Well, Europe has been accused of agricultural dumping. She had excess production that she would pay. So we shifting fundings to ecology, and which this reduces the excess, of course, farming agricultural excess. But well, I might spare you the details, but of the common agricultural policy, it's not the topic of the day. So just to answer your question, well, even for operators at the level of the territories, I'm sure this type of funding is not going to end soon. Well, it all depends on the will of the local, or the public authorities, or the public policies, and of course, of the political changes. And we've been able to see, for example, you talked about the regional scale. I mean, here we're talking about a very strategic scale, which depends on the on the political power, and it could have severe consequences. Another question in 10 seconds. The ecosystemic services, there is no market for it. You have to, there must be a political intermediation to pay, because otherwise, and in the case of, when, as we say in terms of agricultural or forestry practice, well, these are, or maybe through rural tourism, but those are things that we don't want to, cannot be sort of treated as commodities. So we have to accept that it will stay associated with the politics, and the policies, that they could be, of course, there are risks. So truly, in 10 seconds, two things I want to mention following your comments. First, sometimes there are markets created. I'm talking about compensation. There is a compensation market which has been created in 2016 to turn this tool, which is a regulatory tool, an obligation where there's a project, a motorway project that destroys a wetland, they have to compensate for the loss of the wetland. Well, so we give free hand to the market, because we create market, and therefore we leave it in the we give it free hand. Another example would be the environmental obligations, which bring us back to the initial discussion, the fact that to finance a private owner to protect the environment on his property. Now my question is, okay, fine, we will pay this owner, and we will conclude the contract, but where does the money come from? Who can pay this owner so that he will not destroy the forest on his land? And again, it will be public money, and again, we'll have to yield to the political wills. And this is the case with any public policy. As whenever there is good and public services, ecosystemic services, and they're not commodities, it's difficult to turn them into commodities. They are also the right to pollute. I mean, we could say that we have a market of public law, but it's not. It is artificial, but it exists because we decided it existed. But if you market to buy apple, someone produces apples, and he sells the apples to you. I mean, end of story. For the pollution, it's different. We have to control it. We have to sell them rights to pollute. It's not a natural market. It all depends on the politicians. Well, it might be an illusion to say, the politics intervene in private you cannot sell any apple, full of pesticides, so the public authority, what they call the politics, but the public authority is always intervenes a lot, so it's more present than we imagine. The Risk and Environment Master, it's a multidisciplinary master where students, they're in M1 in discipline, in economy or in law or in School of Engineers, and we group them in M2 in one generalist. There is governance of risk, government of environmental risks, which discuss the economy of environment, of soil environmental law, and as Gaetan said, there will be more broader consideration with circular economy, climate change, so on and so forth, and a more specific route on water, which will be in 2023, called governance of urban risk and urban and aquatic risk. the same principle of disciplinary, but it is with courses which are more focused on those domains. Thank you. Two words about the environment and urban development law, Lyon 3 law faculty, based on a common part which is public law in M1, even though we have to follow some specific course, law of natural resources, law of environment, urban planning. And then students will be in M2 within the with specific domains in water law and the risk law and so on and so forth. And the water is a topic which is quite significant within this the education and pedagogical the activities of this master.